The drive home should have been like any other. But life doesn't always follow the paths we expect. The light drizzle that had begun to fall earlier turned into a gentle mist, creating a glistening sheen on the asphalt. Emily Thompson, a 32-year-old accountant from Chicago, shifted her focus between the dimming skyline ahead and the windshield wipers working rhythmically. The familiar rhythm of her commute was comforting, offering a sense of routine after a demanding week at work. But in the blink of an eye, her ordinary life became something extraordinary. The truck appeared out of nowhere, its headlights cutting through the mist as it hydroplaned across the median. It was moving too fast, and there was no time to react. Emily barely registered the looming danger before the impact. A deafening cacophony of metal twisting against metal filled the air as her car was thrust sideways. She felt a sharp pain in her side, a blinding flash behind her eyes. And then, nothing. The next sensation was one of detachment. She opened her eyes, but instead of being confined by the crumpled remains of her car, she found herself floating above it. Her body lay below, motionless and fragile amidst the wreckage. She watched as paramedics scrambled to free her, their voices urgent and tinged with desperation. Emily wanted to reach out to them, to assure them she was fine, but her words went unheard. It was a strange feeling, to be present but completely unseen. An observer of her own life unraveling below. As she hovered, a warmth began to envelop her. It started as a subtle glow in the distance but grew steadily, pulling her attention away from the scene below. The light wasn't blinding, it was soft and inviting. Like the first rays of sunlight breaking through after a storm. It called to her, not with words but with an unspoken promise of peace and understanding. Drawn toward it, she felt her surroundings shift. The sounds of sirens and frantic voices faded into silence, replaced by a deep, resonant stillness. The light grew brighter as she moved closer, its glow wrapping around her like a comforting embrace. It wasn't just light, it was love, pure and unconditional. All the fear, pain, and confusion she had felt moments before dissolved in its presence. Emily felt lighter than she ever had, as though the burdens of her earthly existence had been gently lifted away. As she stepped into the heart of the light, she found herself in a space unlike anything she had ever known. It wasn't a place in the traditional sense. There were no walls, no floor, no ceiling, yet it felt more real than anything she had experienced before. The light illuminated everything, and within it, she felt completely seen. Every part of her, the good, the bad, the broken, was laid bare. Yet she felt no judgment, only acceptance. It was then that she saw him. A figure emerged from the brilliance, radiant and majestic yet gentle and familiar. Emily instinctively knew who he was, even though he didn't look exactly as she had imagined. His presence exuded an undeniable authority, but it was tempered by a profound kindness. His eyes, filled with infinite wisdom and love, met hers, and in that moment, she felt as though he understood everything about her, every triumph, every failure, every secret she had ever held. "Emily," he said, his voice resonating through her being like a melody she had always known but never heard. "Welcome." She was overwhelmed, struggling to find the words to respond. A wave of emotions washed over her, joy, awe, peace, but also a deep sense of belonging, as though she had finally come home. Her mind swirled with questions, but one rose above all others, urgent and insistent. "Jesus," she managed to say, her voice trembling, "when are you coming back? The world, it's in such turmoil. We need you now more than ever." He smiled, a gentle expression that carried both understanding and patience. "My child," he replied, "it is not for humans to know the exact day or hour of my return. Not even the angels in heaven know, nor the Son, but only the Father." Emily felt a pang of disappointment, but before she could dwell on it, he continued, "However, I have shown you signs of what will come to pass in the end times. Remember these, for they are important." As he spoke, the space around them began to shift. Emily found herself surrounded by visions, each one more vivid and overwhelming than the last. It was as though she were standing in the midst of events as they unfolded, witnessing not the past or present but the future. The first vision was one of conflict. She saw nations rising against nations, armies clashing in battles that scarred the earth. Cities she recognized, New York, London, Tokyo, were engulfed in flames. The air was thick with smoke and the sounds of war. Soldiers fought in streets, jungles, in deserts, their faces etched with fear and determination. In one moment, she witnessed naval battles raging across vast oceans. In another, tanks rumbled through European cities reduced to rubble. The devastation was staggering. These are wars and rumors of wars, Jesus explained, his voice tinged with sadness. They're but the beginning. The vision shifted to scenes of natural disasters, earthquakes shaking cities to their foundations, tsunamis swallowing entire coastlines, droughts turning fertile lands into barren deserts. Emily watched as people struggled to survive, their lives upended by forces beyond their control. The cries of the suffering echoed in her ears, their pain palpable. Famines, earthquakes, and calamities will increase, he said, his tone heavy. The world groans for redemption. Another vision appeared, this one of charismatic figures addressing vast crowds. They spoke with eloquence and performed acts that appeared miraculous, healing the sick and commanding the elements. The people adored them, but Emily felt an unease beneath the surface. There was a coldness in their eyes, a hunger for power that belied their benevolent words. False prophets will arise, Jesus warned. They will deceive many. Be vigilant, for not all who claim to speak in my name are true. The scenes grew darker. She saw believers being persecuted for their faith, arrested, beaten, and even killed. Secret gatherings of worshippers huddled in basements and caves, their voices hushed in fear. Despite the danger, their faces radiated a peace that defied understanding. My followers will face hatred and persecution, he said solemnly, but those who stand firm to the end will be saved. Emily's heart ached at the suffering she witnessed. But amidst the darkness, there was also hope. She saw people from every corner of the world hearing about Jesus. Many for the first time. Missionaries braved dangerous territories. Technology spread the message to the most remote places. And underground churches flourished despite intense persecution. The gospel was reaching those who had never heard it before. The message of love and salvation will be preached to all nations, Jesus said, a note of triumph in his voice. Then the end will come. The final vision was the most overwhelming. The sun darkened, the moon turned blood red, and stars fell from the sky. The earth shook violently, mountains crumbled, and islands vanished beneath the waves. The very fabric of the universe seemed to unravel, revealing a realm beyond comprehension. The heavens themselves appeared to tremble. And amidst the chaos, a figure emerged in the clouds, a radiant being surrounded by a host of angels. When these things begin to take place, Jesus said, his voice steady, stand up and lift your heads, for your redemption is drawing near. As the visions faded, Emily turned to him, her mind reeling. Why are you showing me this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because you asked, he replied gently, and because you have a purpose to fulfill. Before she could respond, she felt the light begin to fade. A sense of urgency gripped her as she realized what was happening. I don't want to leave, she said, her voice trembling. There's so much pain back there. Can't I stay here with you? Jesus smiled, his love enveloping her like a warm embrace. Your time here is not yet. There is still work for you to do. Share what you have seen. Help others prepare their hearts. Live with purpose and love. His words filled her with a courage she hadn't known before. Will I remember all of this? She asked, her voice steadying. You will remember what you need to, he assured her. Now go, Emily. Be a light in the darkness. With those words, she felt herself being pulled back, the warmth of the light giving way to the cold reality of her physical body. The paramedics' voices came into focus as she gasped for air, her eyes fluttering open. She's back, one of them said, relief evident in his voice. Emily had returned, but she was forever changed. Emily found herself floating, suspended in a way that felt both natural and extraordinary. Below her, the twisted wreckage of her car lay still under the glow of flashing emergency lights. Paramedics worked frantically to stabilize her broken body. Their movements hurried but precise. It was surreal, seeing her own form from this vantage point. Separated yet deeply connected, she felt no pain, only a peculiar calmness that seemed to embrace her entirely. The chaos of the scene below, the sirens wailing in the distance, and the cold rain falling, none of it reached her in this new space. Instead, there was a soft hum, a vibration that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was then she noticed the light. It began as a faint glow on the edge of her awareness. But it grew rapidly, pulling her attention away from the scene below. The light wasn't harsh or blinding, it was warm and inviting. Like the first golden rays of dawn, it surrounded her, not just physically but emotionally, as though it understood every thought and feeling she had ever experienced. It was love, unconditional, pure, and infinite. As she drifted closer, the light seemed to open, revealing a realm that defied all earthly description. Colors she had never seen before shimmered and danced, creating an atmosphere that felt alive. The air, if it could even be called that, was filled with a melody that resonated in her very being. It wasn't music in the traditional sense, but a harmonious blend of sounds and emotions that made her feel more whole than she ever had. In the center of this brilliance, a figure emerged. At first, it was just a silhouette, but as Emily drew closer, the form became clearer. Standing before her was a being of immense radiance. Though the figure exuded authority, there was nothing intimidating about it. Instead, it was comforting, familiar even. As their eyes met, Emily knew instinctively who he was. Jesus, she whispered, though her voice didn't seem to come from her mouth but from her very essence. He smiled, a gesture so full of love and understanding that it brought tears to her eyes. His presence was overwhelming yet gentle, filling her with a peace she had never known. It was as if he could see every part of her, her triumphs, her failures, her fears, and loved her completely. Without judgment. Emily, he said, his voice resonating through her soul. Welcome. She felt a wave of emotion crash over her, joy, awe, gratitude, but also a deep longing. This place, this presence, felt like home in a way nothing else ever had. For a moment, she forgot the pain, the crash, the world she had left behind. Why am I here? She finally managed to ask, her voice trembling. You have come to glimpse what lies beyond, he replied, his tone gentle yet filled with purpose. There is much to show you, and much for you to carry back. Emily's mind swirled with questions, but one rose above the rest. It was a question that had lingered in her heart for years. A question she hadn't even realized she had carried until this moment. When are you coming back? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The world is in such chaos. We need you now more than ever. His expression softened, a mix of compassion and patience. It is not for humans to know the exact day or hour of my return, he said. Not even the angels in heaven know, nor the Son, but only the Father. Emily felt a pang of disappointment, but before she could respond, he continued, however, you are here to witness, to understand, and to prepare. Come, and I will show you what must take place. As he extended his hand, the realm around them began to shift. The vibrant colors and harmonious sounds faded, replaced by scenes that were stark and vivid. It was as though she had stepped into another reality, one where time and space bent to reveal the future. The first vision was one of conflict. She saw nations clashing in violent battles, their armies marching across scorched lands, cities burned, their streets littered with debris and the echoes of despair. She recognized some of the places, New York, London, Tokyo, but others were unfamiliar. The scale of the destruction was unimaginable. These are wars and rumors of wars, Jesus said, his voice filled with sorrow. They are the beginning of the end. The vision shifted, and Emily found herself in the midst of natural disasters. Earthquakes shook cities to their foundations. Tsunamis engulfed entire coastlines, and droughts turned lush lands into barren wastelands. She saw people struggling to survive, their faces etched with desperation and fear. The earth groans, he explained, longing for redemption. The scenes continued to unfold, famine, disease, and widespread suffering. Yet amidst the chaos, she also saw glimmers of hope. People reached out to help one another. Communities came together, and acts of kindness shone like beacons in the darkness. Emily turned to Jesus, her heart heavy with the weight of what she was witnessing. Why are you showing me this? She asked, tears streaming down her face. Because you have a purpose, he said, his gaze steady. "You must help others understand. Prepare their hearts, for the time draws near." The visions shifted again, and this time Emily saw people gathered in secret, worshiping in hushed tones. Their faces were filled with a quiet determination. Even as they looked over their shoulders in fear, she realized these were believers, holding fast to their faith despite persecution. "My followers will face trials," Jesus said solemnly, "but those who stand firm to the end will be saved." Emily felt a surge of courage as she listened, a resolve building within her. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she understood that her role was not to fear it but to face it with faith and purpose. As the visions began to fade, she turned back to Jesus. "Will I remember all of this?" she asked, her voice steadying. "You will remember what you need to," he assured her. "Now go, and let your light shine." With those words, Emily felt herself being pulled back. The warmth of the light began to fade, replaced by the cold reality of her physical body. She gasped as her eyes fluttered open, the voices of paramedics coming into focus. "She's back," one of them said, relief evident in his tone. Emily had returned, but she knew she was forever changed. The journey was just beginning. As Emily's eyes opened and she drew her first breath back in her body, the weight of what she had experienced still clung to her. The paramedics surrounded her, their faces a mix of astonishment and relief. One of them spoke gently. "You're a miracle, ma'am. We thought we'd lost you." But Emily hardly heard them. Her mind was flooded with the images and words she had witnessed. The visions of conflict, suffering, and hope replayed vividly, like a reel of memories too profound to ignore. Even in her weakened state, she knew one thing for certain: she couldn't let this experience fade into the background of her life. It was more than just a personal revelation, it was a calling. The next days were a blur of hospital rooms and recovery. Doctors marveled at her survival, calling her healing process unexplainable. Friends and family visited, offering words of comfort and support. Yet Emily remained quiet about what she had seen. It wasn't that she doubted its reality, it was too immense to put into words. How could she possibly explain to others the love and peace she had felt in the presence of Jesus? Or the profound knowledge of the end times that had been imparted to her? But as she lay in the sterile hospital bed, staring at the ceiling in the quiet moments of the night, she felt a tug, a gentle but persistent nudge in her heart. She knew she couldn't keep this to herself forever. This wasn't just for her, it was for everyone who would listen. When she was finally discharged, Emily returned home, her body still bruised but her spirit ablaze. She sat at her kitchen table, a steaming cup of tea in her hands, and stared out the window. The city hummed with life outside, oblivious to the truths she now carried. It felt almost surreal to be back in the world, knowing what lay beyond the veil of life and death. One morning, she decided to write down everything she remembered. The words poured out of her like a river. Unfiltered and raw, she recounted the accident, the out-of-body experience, and her encounter with Jesus. She detailed the visions of war, natural disasters, persecution, and hope. Writing it all down brought clarity. But it also brought a new sense of urgency. She needed to share this. Emily started small, speaking to close friends and family. At first, many were skeptical, brushing off her story as a dream or the result of trauma. But as she spoke, there was a conviction in her voice that couldn't be ignored. Her eyes carried a depth that hadn't been there before, and her words resonated with a power that seemed beyond her own. Some listened intently, their curiosity piqued. "What was it like to see Jesus?" they asked. "What do you mean about the signs of the end times?" Others dismissed her, uncomfortable with the notion of such profound experiences. But Emily wasn't deterred. She wasn't sharing her story for validation. She was sharing it because she felt compelled to. As the weeks turned into months, Emily's life began to transform. She found herself drawn to acts of service, volunteering at shelters, mentoring youth, and offering support to those in crisis. Every action felt imbued with purpose, as though each small act of kindness was a step toward fulfilling the mission Jesus had given her. One evening, Emily was invited to speak at a local church. The pastor had heard about her experience through a mutual friend and asked if she would share her testimony with the congregation. Nervous but resolute, she agreed. The church was filled with people of all ages, their faces reflecting a mix of curiosity and skepticism. As Emily stood at the podium, she took a deep breath and began. "I never thought I'd be standing here, sharing this story," she started, her voice trembling slightly. "But what I experienced changed everything I thought I knew about life, death, and faith. I'm here to tell you that there's more to this life. More to what comes after. And more to the love that surrounds us than we can possibly imagine." She recounted her journey, her encounter with Jesus, and the visions she had seen. She spoke about the wars, the natural disasters, the persecution, and the hope that persisted amidst it all. As she spoke, the room grew silent, the weight of her words sinking in. "But the most important thing I learned," she said, her voice steady now, "is that we don't have to wait for the end times to live with purpose. Jesus didn't just show me what's to come. He reminded me that every moment we have is a chance to love, to serve, and to prepare our hearts. He said, 'Let your light shine before others,' and that's what I intend to do." When she finished, the room erupted into applause. But it wasn't the recognition that mattered to Emily. It was the quiet conversations that followed, the tearful confessions, the renewed commitments to faith, the people who approached her and said, "I needed to hear this." Over time, Emily's story reached beyond her community. She began to receive invitations to share her testimony at conferences, churches, and even online platforms. She used every opportunity to spread the message of hope and preparation that Jesus had entrusted to her. It wasn't about fame or recognition, it was about planting seeds of faith in the hearts of others. Yet, amidst all the outward changes, Emily's private moments of reflection remained sacred. She often found herself sitting in quiet prayer, reconnecting with the love and peace she had felt in Jesus' presence. It was these moments that sustained her, reminding her of the truth she had seen and the mission she had been given. Emily knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would be challenges, doubts, and moments of fear, but she held on to Jesus' final words to her, "I am with you always, even to the end of the age." It was a promise that gave her the courage to continue, one step at a time. Her journey was far from over, but Emily understood now that every day was a part of her purpose, a chance to shine her light and bring a little more hope to a world that so desperately needed it. Emily's life became a tapestry woven with acts of purpose and moments of reflection. Each day, she carried the weight of her experience, not as a burden, but as a guiding light. The visions she had seen, the words Jesus had spoken, and the love that had enveloped her in that otherworldly realm now fueled her every action. She found herself drawn to people on the margins of society, the homeless, the lost, the broken-hearted. It was as if her encounter with Jesus had attuned her to the silent cries of others, the pain they tried to hide. She volunteered at shelters and food banks, offering not just practical help but a listening ear and a kind word. She shared her story with those who asked, but more often, she simply offered her presence. Sometimes, she realized, what people need most is to know they're not alone. One day, while serving at a local soup kitchen, she met a young woman named Mia. Mia had been living on the streets for months, her eyes hollow with despair. Emily approached her with a tray of food and a warm smile. "Hi, I'm Emily. Mind if I sit with you?" Mia hesitated but nodded. As they ate together, Mia slowly opened up, sharing bits and pieces of her story, a string of bad luck, a series of betrayals, and a deep sense of hopelessness. "I feel like there's nothing left for me," Mia admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "No one cares, not even God." Emily's heart ached at the words, but she didn't rush to respond. Instead, she reached out and placed a gentle hand on Mia's arm. "I felt that way too," she said softly, "but I promise you, you're not alone, and you are deeply, unconditionally loved, more than you can imagine." Mia looked at her, tears welling in her eyes. "How can you be so sure?" Emily hesitated for a moment, then decided to share a piece of her story. She told Mia about her accident, the light, and her encounter with Jesus. She didn't focus on the dramatic aspects but on the overwhelming love and hope she had felt. "Jesus showed me that even in our darkest moments, we're never abandoned," Emily said. "His love is always there, waiting for us to reach out and accept it." Mia didn't say much, but something in her expression shifted. She returned to the soup kitchen the next day and the day after that, gradually building trust with Emily and the other volunteers. Over time, she began to see glimpses of hope where there had once been only despair. Emily's interactions with people like Mia reminded her of the deeper purpose behind her experience. It wasn't just about sharing visions of the end times or urging people to prepare. It was about embodying the love and compassion she had felt in Jesus' presence. It was about being a light in the darkness, one small act of kindness at a time. As Emily continued her mission, she also faced challenges. Not everyone welcomed her message, and some dismissed her experiences as mere hallucinations or fantasies. Others accused her of trying to scare people into faith with tales of apocalyptic visions. At first, the criticism stung. She wanted so badly for people to understand, to feel the urgency she felt. But she reminded herself of Jesus' words, "You will remember what you need to. Share your light, and leave the rest to me." With time, Emily learned to let go of the need for validation. Her job wasn't to convince anyone, it was to share her story and live out her faith. She trusted that the seeds she planted would take root in their own time, in their own way. Meanwhile, the visions she had seen continued to haunt and inspire her. She couldn't forget the wars, the natural disasters, or the persecution of believers. But she also couldn't forget the hope, the underground churches flourishing, the people hearing about Jesus for the first time, the small acts of love that shone brighter than any darkness. One night, as she knelt in prayer, Emily found herself asking, "Why me, Lord? Why did you choose me for this?" The answer wasn't a voice but a feeling, a quiet assurance that settled over her heart. It wasn't about being special or worthy, it was about being willing. She had asked to understand, and Jesus had answered. Now it was her turn to respond. This realization gave her a renewed sense of purpose. She began speaking at events, sharing her testimony with larger audiences. She used her platform to advocate for compassion and action, encouraging people to live with love and intention, regardless of their beliefs about the end times. It's not about fear, she told them. It's about hope. It's about preparing our hearts and living in a way that reflects the love we've been given. Emily also turned to writing, penning articles and blogs that reached thousands of readers. Her words were simple but powerful, laced with the authenticity of someone who had truly walked through the valley and come out the other side. She wrote about faith, forgiveness, and the importance of seeing the humanity in others. She shared practical ways for people to make a difference, volunteering, supporting those in need, and showing kindness in everyday interactions. Through it all, Emily remained grounded in her own quiet moments of reflection. She would often sit by her window, watching the city lights twinkle like stars, and whisper a prayer of gratitude for her survival, for her purpose, for the chance to be a small part of something so much greater than herself. Emily knew the journey ahead would be long and challenging. The world was still full of pain and uncertainty, and there was so much work to be done. But she also knew she wasn't walking it alone. Jesus had promised to be with her always, and that promise gave her the courage to keep going. Her mission wasn't about waiting for the end. It was about living each day with purpose and love, trusting that even the smallest acts of kindness could echo into eternity. Emily's life continued to unfold in ways she could never have imagined before her near-death experience. The clarity of her purpose gave her a sense of direction, but the road wasn't always smooth. For every person inspired by her story, there was another who doubted or dismissed her message. Still, Emily pressed on, her faith in the calling she had received unwavering. Her work began to draw attention from larger organizations. A nonprofit group dedicated to supporting survivors of life-altering experiences reached out to her, inviting her to join their speaker network. The group connected people who had undergone profound transformations to share their insights with communities across the country. Emily hesitated at first, unsure if her story belonged alongside others focused on different kinds of challenges and triumphs. But the organization's leader reassured her, "Your story is about more than death and the afterlife. It's about love, hope, and the strength to keep going." Emily agreed, and before long, she found herself traveling to new cities, standing before packed auditoriums and intimate groups alike. The diversity of the audiences surprised her. People of all ages, backgrounds, and beliefs came to listen. Some were curious, others skeptical, and still others came searching for answers to questions they hadn't yet dared to voice. One evening, after a talk at a college campus, a student approached her. The young woman looked nervous, clutching a notebook to her chest. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "I lost my mom last year, and I've been so angry at her, at God, at everything. But hearing you talk about Jesus' love and the hope you felt, it made me realize I've been running from something I didn't need to fear." Emily's eyes filled with tears as she listened. Moments like these reminded her why she was doing this work. "It's okay to feel angry," she told the student, "but don't let it keep you from finding the love that's still there." Grief and hope can coexist. The two talked for hours, and as Emily left the campus that night, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. It wasn't just about sharing her story, it was about meeting people where they were and helping them take one step closer to healing. Despite the emotional highs of these encounters, Emily often found herself physically and mentally exhausted. She was pouring so much of herself into her work that she began to neglect her own needs. One evening, after a particularly long week of speaking engagements, she collapsed onto her couch, her body aching and her mind racing. "Lord," she prayed, "I'm trying to do what you asked, but I feel so small and weak. How can I keep going when there's so much to be done?" The answer came not in words but in a gentle, undeniable feeling of reassurance. It was as though Jesus was reminding her that she didn't have to carry the weight of the world alone. Her role was to be faithful, not to solve every problem or heal every hurt. She needed to trust that the seeds she planted would grow in their own time. Taking this to heart, Emily made an effort to find balance. She set aside time each day for prayer and quiet reflection, grounding herself in the love and peace she had experienced during her encounter with Jesus. She also leaned on her community, friends, family, and fellow believers, allowing them to support her when the road felt too difficult. As she found her rhythm again, Emily began to see her work in a new light. It wasn't about achieving grand, measurable outcomes. It was about being present, showing up with love, and trusting that even the smallest acts of kindness mattered. One of her most transformative moments came during a visit to a maximum security prison. A chaplain had invited her to speak to a group of inmates, many of whom were serving life sentences. Emily was nervous. She had never been in a place like this before, and she wasn't sure how her story would be received. When she arrived, the room was filled with men whose faces bore the marks of hard lives, scars, lines of worry, and eyes that had seen too much. Emily took a deep breath and began to speak. She didn't sugarcoat her story or shy away from the raw emotions it had stirred in her. She spoke about the love she had felt in Jesus' presence, the hope that had sustained her, and the reminder that no one was beyond redemption. At the end of her talk, there was a long silence. Then, one by one, the inmates began to speak. They shared their own stories of loss, regret, and longing for a second chance. One man, his voice thick with emotion, said, "Do you really believe Jesus loves someone like me? After everything I've done?" Emily looked at him, her heart breaking for the pain he carried. "I don't just believe it," she said. "I know it. I've seen it. His love isn't about what you've done or haven't done. It's about who you are. And who you are is someone worth loving." The man nodded, tears streaming down his face. That night, Emily left the prison feeling more humbled and inspired than ever. It wasn't her words that had made a difference, it was the love and hope they carried. The same love and hope she had received from Jesus. As Emily's journey continued, she began to notice the ripple effects of her work. People she had spoken to would reach out months or even years later, sharing how her story had impacted their lives. Some had found faith for the first time. Others had rekindled a sense of purpose they thought they had lost. Many had taken small but meaningful steps to spread kindness in their own communities. Emily often reflected on the visions Jesus had shown her of the end times. The wars, disasters, and persecution were sobering, but they no longer filled her with fear. Instead, they reminded her of the resilience of hope and the power of love to shine even in the darkest times. Her work wasn't about preparing for the end of the world. It was about living in a way that brought a little more heaven to earth. It was about loving others as Jesus had loved her, trusting that even the smallest light could pierce the deepest darkness. Emily's life had become a living testimony to the power of love, faith, and resilience. But even as she worked tirelessly to share her story, she knew the road ahead would bring its own challenges. The visions she had seen of the end times, the wars, disasters, and persecution, were not just distant possibilities. They were beginning to feel closer, reflected in the world's growing unrest and division. One afternoon, while preparing for another speaking engagement, Emily received a phone call. It was from a close friend, Laura, someone she had known since childhood. Laura's voice trembled as she explained that her family was facing a crisis. Her husband had lost his job, their home was at risk, and the stress was straining their marriage. "I don't even know why I'm calling you," Laura admitted, her voice breaking. I didn't know who else to talk to." Emily listened intently, her heart aching for her friend. She could hear the despair in Laura's words, the weight of burdens that felt impossible to bear. "I'm so sorry, Laura," she said gently. "You're not alone in this. Can I come over and talk? We can pray together if you'd like." That evening, Emily sat with Laura and her family in their small living room. She shared her own struggles and the peace she had found in her faith. She reminded them that even in the darkest moments, there was hope. They prayed together, their hands clasped tightly, and for the first time in weeks, Laura felt a glimmer of relief. Moments like these reminded Emily of the delicate balance between sharing her message with large audiences and meeting individual needs. While the big events brought visibility to her work, it was in the quiet, personal interactions that she felt the deepest connection to her purpose. But not everyone welcomed Emily's message. As her story gained more attention, she began to encounter resistance. Some accused her of spreading fear or questioned the authenticity of her experience. Others dismissed her as a fraud or a fanatic. While she tried to stay focused on her mission, the criticism often weighed heavily on her. One particularly harsh comment came from an audience member after a conference. "What makes you think you're special enough to have seen Jesus?" the man asked, his tone laced with skepticism. "Why would God choose you and not someone else?" The question struck a nerve. Emily had often wondered the same thing, especially in the early days after her near-death experience. But instead of responding defensively, she took a deep breath and met the man's gaze. "I don't think it's about being special," she said. "I think it's about being willing. I asked to understand, and Jesus answered. But what I saw and felt wasn't just for me, it was for everyone. I'm just trying to share the love and hope I've been given." The man didn't respond, but Emily noticed a flicker of thoughtfulness in his expression. It was enough to remind her that even the smallest seeds could grow in unexpected ways. As the weeks turned into months, Emily faced another test of faith, this time a personal one. Her father, who had always been a steady presence in her life, was diagnosed with a serious illness. The news shook her to her core, and for the first time in years, she felt the edges of fear creeping in. Sitting by his hospital bed one evening, Emily held her father's hand and fought back tears. "Dad, I'm scared," she admitted. "I've seen so much hope. But right now, it feels so far away." Her father, ever the pragmatist, smiled weakly. "Emily, you've been through more than most people ever will. You've seen what's waiting on the other side. If anyone can handle this, it's you." His words were comforting, but they didn't erase her pain. In the quiet moments that followed, Emily prayed silently, asking Jesus for strength and guidance. And as she prayed, she felt a familiar warmth, a reminder of the love that had sustained her through every challenge. The experience with her father deepened Emily's understanding of what it meant to live with faith. It wasn't about avoiding pain or pretending everything was okay. It was about finding the strength to face life's trials with courage, knowing that love and hope could carry her through. During this time, Emily began to connect more deeply with the people she met through her work. Many shared their own stories of loss, resilience, and faith. Some spoke of encounters with Jesus or moments of divine intervention that had changed their lives. Each story reinforced the common thread that bound them all together, a longing for connection, meaning, and hope. One of the most profound encounters came during a visit to a women's shelter. Emily met a woman named Angela, who had fled an abusive relationship with her young daughter. Angela's eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but there was a quiet determination in her voice as she described her journey. I don't know how I made it out. Angela said, there were times I wanted to give up. But something kept pushing me forward, like someone was carrying me when I couldn't walk anymore. Emily nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I believe you, she said, and I believe that love, God's love, was with you every step of the way. Angela smiled faintly, her eyes shining with gratitude. Maybe that's why I'm still here. To find that love again. The moment stayed with Emily long after she left the shelter. It reminded her that her mission wasn't just about preparing people for the end times. It was about helping them find hope and purpose in the here and now. As she reflected on all she had experienced, Emily realized that her work was far from over. The world was still full of pain and uncertainty, but it was also full of resilience and love. Her job was to keep planting seeds, trusting that they would grow in their own time and in their own way. Through every challenge, Emily held on to the promise Jesus had made to her. I am with you always. It was this promise that gave her the courage to keep going, to face each day with hope and purpose, and to be a light in the darkness for those around her. Emily's mission continued to evolve as she embraced new opportunities to share her story and message. The world, as she had witnessed in her visions, seemed to be unraveling in ways that felt both alarming and deeply familiar. Political tensions were escalating, natural disasters were becoming more frequent, and acts of violence and hatred were spreading. Yet, amid the chaos, Emily saw glimmers of light, small acts of kindness, resilience, and faith that reminded her of the power of love to overcome darkness. Her father's illness brought her closer to her family. As she spent more time at home caring for him, Emily began to reflect on the role of family in fostering hope and strength. Her father's unwavering courage, even in the face of his illness, became a source of inspiration for her. He often reminded her of the simple yet profound truths she had learned during her near-death experience: to love deeply, to forgive, and to live with purpose. One afternoon, while sitting by her father's bedside, Emily shared more about the visions Jesus had shown her. Dad, she began, when I saw those signs of the end times, the wars, the disasters, the false prophets, I felt so small, like there was nothing I could do. But now, I realize it wasn't about feeling powerless. It was about understanding the importance of standing firm in love and faith. No matter what happens. Her father nodded, his gaze steady. You've always been strong, Emily, and now you know where that strength comes from. It's not just for you, it's for everyone you meet. Keep sharing it. Inspired by her father's words, Emily began focusing on building communities of faith and support. She started hosting small gatherings in her home, inviting friends, neighbors, and even strangers to come together to share their stories, pray, and support one another. These gatherings quickly grew into a network of people committed to living with purpose and spreading hope. One evening, during one of these gatherings, a man named Carlos shared his own experience. A former soldier, he had struggled with guilt and trauma from his time in combat. He spoke about the nightmares that haunted him and the emptiness he felt. Even after returning to his family, I didn't think I deserved forgiveness, Carlos said, his voice trembling. But hearing your story, Emily, it gave me hope. It made me realize that if Jesus can forgive and love us, even in our brokenness, maybe I can find a way to forgive myself. The group listened in silence. Moved by Carlos's vulnerability, Emily reached out and took his hand. Carlos, you're not alone. None of us are. What you've been through doesn't define you. It's how you move forward that matters. Moments like these reminded Emily that her work was not about grand gestures or dramatic changes. It was about meeting people where they were, offering them the same love and hope she had received, and reminding them of their own worth and strength. As her community grew, Emily also began to explore new ways to reach people who couldn't attend her gatherings in person. She started a podcast, sharing stories of hope and resilience from people she had met along the way. The podcast quickly gained a following, with listeners from around the world tuning in to hear stories of transformation and faith. One listener, a woman named Grace from Australia, reached out to Emily after hearing an episode about finding strength in adversity. Grace shared that she had recently lost her husband and was struggling to care for her 2 young children on her own. Your words reminded me that I'm not alone, Grace wrote in her email. Even on the hardest days, I feel like there's a light guiding me forward. Thank you for being that light." Emily was deeply moved by Grace's message. It reinforced her belief that even the smallest efforts to spread hope could have a profound impact. She continued to use her platform to amplify voices of resilience and love, building a network of people committed to making the world a little brighter. But the challenges Emily faced were not just external. She often found herself grappling with her own doubts and fears. The weight of the responsibility she felt sometimes threatened to overwhelm her, and there were days when she questioned whether she was truly making a difference. In those moments, Emily turned to prayer and reflection. She revisited the promises Jesus had made to her, drawing strength from his assurance that she was never alone. She also leaned on the support of her community, who reminded her of the lives she had touched and the hope she had inspired. One of the most profound reminders came during a trip to a refugee camp in the Middle East. Emily had been invited by a humanitarian organization to speak to families who had been displaced by war. As she walked through the camp, she was struck by the resilience of the people she met. Despite the hardships they faced, many spoke of their faith and hope for a better future. During her talk, Emily shared her own story, emphasizing the love and peace she had experienced in Jesus' presence. She spoke about the visions of the end times, not as a source of fear, but as a reminder of the importance of living with love and purpose. Afterward, a young girl named Layla approached her. Barely 10 years old, Layla had lost her parents in the conflict and was living with her grandmother. Despite her loss, Layla's eyes shone with determination. "Miss Emily," she said, "my grandmother says that even when everything feels broken, love can fix it. Is that true?" Emily knelt down to meet Layla's gaze, her heart aching for the pain the young girl had endured. "Yes, Layla," she said softly, "love is the strongest thing in the world. It can heal even the deepest wounds." As she hugged Layla, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her work wasn't about fixing the world's problems, it was about reminding people that even in the darkest times, love could light the way. Back home, Emily continued to focus on building connections and spreading hope. She knew that the challenges the world faced were immense, but she also believed in the power of small, meaningful acts to create lasting change. Each life she touched was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the boundless love that Jesus had shown her. Through it all, Emily held onto the promise that had carried her through her near-death experience. "I am with you always." It was this promise that gave her the courage to keep going, to face each day with hope and determination, and to be a light in the darkness for those around her. Emily's journey as a beacon of hope was reaching far and wide. Her community of listeners, readers, and supporters was growing exponentially, spanning continents and cultures. Yet, as her influence expanded, so did the challenges. The world seemed to teeter on the brink of chaos, and Emily felt the urgency of her mission intensify. The visions Jesus had shown her of the end times continued to guide her. She saw their reflections in the daily news, rising tensions between nations, natural disasters of unprecedented scale, and the growing divide between people. But she also saw a countercurrent of love, faith, and resilience, a quiet but powerful force that gave her hope. One day, Emily received an invitation to speak at an international summit on humanitarian efforts and faith-based leadership. Leaders from various fields, religion, government, education, and activism, were gathering to discuss solutions to the world's pressing challenges. Emily felt both honored and overwhelmed by the invitation. What could she, an accountant turned messenger, offer to such an esteemed audience? She prayed for guidance, seeking the words and wisdom to convey her message effectively. As the day of the summit approached, Emily felt a deep sense of responsibility. This was more than an opportunity to share her story. It was a chance to ignite action on a global scale. When the day arrived, Emily stepped onto the stage, her heart pounding. The audience was a sea of faces from around the world, their expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. Taking a deep breath, she began to speak. "I never imagined I would stand before you today," she started, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "I was an ordinary person living an ordinary life until an extraordinary experience changed everything. What I'm about to share with you isn't just my story, it's a call to action for all of us." Emily recounted her near-death experience with raw honesty, describing the overwhelming love she felt in Jesus' presence and the vivid visions of the end times he had shown her. She didn't shy away from the difficult truths, the wars, the disasters, the suffering, but she also emphasized the hope and resilience she had witnessed, the strength that came from love and faith. "We are living in times of great turmoil," she said, her voice growing stronger, "but we are also living in times of great opportunity. The challenges we face are not insurmountable. They are a call to rise, to come together, and to be the light in the darkness." Emily spoke about the importance of compassion, forgiveness, and unity. She urged the audience to look beyond their differences and work together to address the world's problems. "Each of us has a role to play," she said, "whether you are a leader, a teacher, a healer, or a dreamer. Your actions matter. Your love matters." Her words resonated deeply with many in the audience. As she concluded her speech, the room erupted in applause. People approached her afterward, thanking her for her courage and sharing their own stories of faith and resilience. Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that her message had touched hearts and inspired action. In the months that followed, Emily's work took on a new dimension. She collaborated with humanitarian organizations, faith leaders, and community groups to create initiatives that addressed both spiritual and practical needs. From food drives and disaster relief efforts to interfaith dialogues and mental health support, Emily's network became a force for positive change. One of the most impactful projects was a global campaign called Hope Rising. Its mission was simple yet profound: to spread messages of love, unity, and resilience through acts of kindness and service. People from all walks of life participated, sharing stories of hope and organizing events to support their communities. Emily often reflected on the lessons Jesus had taught her about the end times. "The signs are there," she would tell her team during planning meetings. "But they're not just warnings, they're reminders. Reminders that we have a choice in how we respond. We can choose fear, or we can choose love. We can give in to despair, or we can rise with hope." Her words inspired countless individuals, including a young man named Ahmed from Syria. Ahmed had lost his family in the conflict and was living as a refugee in Europe. He heard Emily's story through a podcast and felt an immediate connection. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of hope. Ahmed reached out to Emily, sharing his dream of helping other refugees rebuild their lives. Touched by his determination, Emily worked with her network to support his efforts. Together, they launched a program that provided education, job training, and emotional support for refugees. Ahmed's program became a model for other initiatives, transforming lives and communities. As Emily's work continued, she often found herself revisiting the lessons of her near-death experience. She remembered the overwhelming love she had felt in Jesus' presence and the peace that had filled her even in the face of the end times. It was this love and peace that she sought to share with the world. But the journey was not without its challenges. Emily faced criticism from those who doubted her experience or disagreed with her message. She encountered resistance from people who were afraid to confront the realities she described. And she wrestled with her own doubts and insecurities, wondering if she was truly making a difference. In those moments, Emily turned to prayer. She found solace in the promise Jesus had made to her: "I am with you always." It was a reminder that she was never alone, that her efforts were part of a greater plan. This faith gave her the strength to persevere, even when the path seemed uncertain. Through it all, Emily remained focused on her mission. She continued to share her story, inspire action, and build connections that spanned cultures and borders. She knew that the challenges the world faced were immense, but she also believed in the power of love to overcome them. As she looked back on her journey, Emily realized that the visions of the end times had not been a message of despair, they had been a call to hope. They were a reminder that even in the darkest moments, light could prevail, and as long as there was love, there was a reason to keep going. Emily's life became a mosaic of interconnected stories, each thread woven together by the profound message of love and resilience she had carried from her near-death experience. Her work had reached the corners of the globe, but the journey remained deeply personal. Every life she touched reminded her of the profound truth she had learned in Jesus' presence, that every soul, every moment, mattered infinitely. Her community-building efforts continued to grow, and the Hope Rising campaign evolved into an international movement. Local chapters sprung up in cities and villages, creating spaces for people to come together, share their struggles, and find solutions. It became a living testament to the power of unity and the ability of ordinary individuals to bring extraordinary change. One day, Emily was invited to speak at a youth conference in Kenya. The event was hosted by a local organization dedicated to empowering young people through education and mentorship. Emily was particularly excited about this trip because it allowed her to connect with the next generation, the very people she believed would shape the future of the world. At the conference, Emily met a young girl named Amina, just 14 years old. Amina had grown up in a rural village with limited access to education and resources. Despite these challenges, Amina had dreams of becoming a doctor. She told Emily about her desire to help her community and how she often studied by candlelight, using second-hand textbooks she had borrowed from neighbors. Emily was deeply moved by Amina's determination. After her speech, she spent time talking with the girl, listening to her aspirations and offering encouragement. "You are already a light in your community, Amina," Emily said. "Your strength and courage inspire others, and I have no doubt that you'll achieve your dreams." Emily's encounter with Amina reignited her passion for education as a tool for empowerment. Upon returning home, she launched an initiative to provide scholarships and resources for underprivileged students around the world. Amina became one of the first recipients, and over time, her story inspired countless others to pursue their dreams despite adversity. While Emily's work brought her immense fulfillment, she also faced moments of profound introspection. The visions of the end times that Jesus had shown her were never far from her thoughts. She often wondered about the balance between preparing for the future and living fully in the present. One evening, during a quiet moment of reflection, Emily returned to the question that had first compelled her to ask Jesus about his return. Why does the world seem to grow darker despite the efforts of so many to spread light? The answer came not in words, but in a memory, a vision of the love she had felt in Jesus' presence. She remembered the way his love had enveloped her, even in the face of the chaos and suffering she had witnessed. It was a reminder that love was not just a feeling but an action, a force that could transform even the darkest circumstances. This realization fueled Emily's next project, a global day of service called the Love Revolution. The concept was simple: one day each year dedicated to acts of love and kindness. People were encouraged to participate in any way they could, whether by volunteering, helping a neighbor, or simply reaching out to someone in need. The inaugural event was a resounding success, with millions of people participating worldwide. Emily received messages from participants sharing their experiences. A man in Argentina wrote about helping rebuild a community center damaged by a storm. A teacher in India shared how her students had organized a food drive for local families. And a nurse in Canada described how her hospital staff had come together to provide free health screenings for underserved communities. These stories reaffirmed Emily's belief in humanity's capacity for good. She saw the day of service as a glimpse of what the world could be, a place where love and compassion triumphed over division and despair. Yet, as much as Emily focused on spreading hope, she also recognized the importance of addressing deeper questions about faith and existence. Her near-death experience had left her with a profound sense of connection to the divine. But she knew that not everyone shared this perspective. She often received messages from skeptics, people who doubted her story or struggled to reconcile her experiences with their own beliefs. Emily approached these conversations with humility and openness. She didn't claim to have all the answers, nor did she try to convince anyone of her truth. Instead, she focused on the universal messages of love, forgiveness, and purpose that had guided her journey. During one particularly memorable encounter, Emily met a scientist named Dr. Marcus Patel, who had spent years researching near-death experiences from a neurological perspective. Intrigued by Emily's story, he invited her to participate in a panel discussion on the intersection of science and spirituality. The discussion was both challenging and enlightening. Marcus shared his research, exploring how the brain might process moments of heightened consciousness during near-death experiences. Emily, in turn, spoke about the spiritual transformation that had shaped her life since her accident. By the end of the discussion, they found common ground in their shared curiosity and desire to understand the mysteries of life. Marcus later told Emily that her story had inspired him to view his work through a broader lens, considering not just the biological but also the existential dimensions of human experience. Emily cherished these moments of connection and growth. They reminded her that the journey of understanding, whether spiritual, scientific, or personal, was ongoing and that every perspective had value. As her journey continued, Emily found herself reflecting on the ripple effects of her work. She thought about Amina, Ahmed, Carlos, and the countless others whose lives had intersected with hers. Each of them had become a part of the tapestry of purpose she was weaving, their stories interwoven with hers in ways she could never have predicted. Through it all, Emily remained grounded in the love and peace she had felt during her near-death experience. She carried the promise of Jesus' words, "I am with you always," as a constant source of strength and guidance. It was this promise that kept her moving forward, even when the path ahead seemed uncertain. As the years passed, Emily's mission evolved, but its essence remained the same: to be a light in the darkness, a messenger of hope, and a reminder that love could transform the world. She knew that the journey was far from over, and she welcomed each new chapter with open arms, ready to face whatever lay ahead. As Emily's journey unfolded, the work she had begun grew into a global movement, touching millions of lives and inspiring countless acts of love and compassion. The visions of the end times that had initially seemed so overwhelming now served as a guide, a reminder that even in the face of darkness, humanity had the capacity to choose light. One of Emily's most profound undertakings was the establishment of Beacons of Light, an international foundation dedicated to addressing the most pressing challenges facing humanity. Its mission was threefold: to provide immediate relief to those in crisis, to promote education and understanding, and to foster global unity through shared acts of service. The foundation quickly became a hub for innovation and collaboration. It brought together leaders from diverse backgrounds, scientists, spiritual leaders, educators, and activists, all united by a common goal: to create a better world. Emily often marveled at how her near-death experience, which had started as a deeply personal journey, had blossomed into a collective movement with the potential to reshape the world. One of the most ambitious projects under the Foundation's umbrella was the Global Hope Network, a platform that connected individuals and organizations working on similar goals. Through this network, resources were shared, ideas exchanged, and solutions amplified. From disaster response teams in Southeast Asia to environmental initiatives in South America, the network became a living testament to the power of unity. Emily often traveled to see the impact of these efforts firsthand. In a small village in Ethiopia, she met farmers who had been given tools and training to combat desertification. They showed her the green fields they had reclaimed from the encroaching desert, their smiles radiating hope. In a refugee camp in Lebanon, she spoke with children who now had access to education and a safe space to play. Their laughter was a poignant reminder of resilience in the face of adversity. But Emily's work wasn't just about large-scale projects. She remained deeply committed to the individual connections that had always been at the heart of her mission. She continued to meet with people one-on-one, listening to their stories, offering encouragement, and sharing the lessons she had learned from her near-death experience. One such encounter was with a young woman named Sophia, who had lost her family in a natural disaster. Struggling with grief and anger, Sophia had heard Emily speak at a local event and approached her afterward. Through tears, she shared her pain and her doubts about faith and purpose. Emily held Sophia's hands and looked into her eyes. "I won't pretend to have all the answers," she said gently, "but I do know this: even in our darkest moments, we are not alone. There is a love that surrounds us, a light that guides us. Even when we can't see it, you are stronger than you know. And your story is not over." Sophia later joined one of the Foundation's initiatives, helping to rebuild her community and finding a renewed sense of purpose in the process. Her transformation became one of many stories that Emily carried with her as a source of inspiration. As the years went on, Emily found herself reflecting more deeply on the visions of the end times. She understood that they were not just warnings but also invitations, calls to action for humanity to rise above division, fear, and despair. She often spoke about this during her public addresses, urging people to see the signs not as harbingers of doom but as opportunities for growth and transformation. In one memorable speech at a global peace summit, Emily said, "The end times are not the end of hope. They are the beginning of a new chapter, one that we have the power to shape. Each of us holds a piece of the puzzle, and together, we can create a picture of love, unity, and resilience." Her words resonated deeply, sparking conversations and initiatives that continued long after the summit ended. People from all walks of life began to see themselves as part of a greater story, one in which their choices mattered profoundly. Emily's own life continued to be a testament to this belief. She faced personal challenges, moments of doubt, and the weight of responsibility that came with her role. But she never wavered in her commitment to the mission that had been entrusted to her. One evening, as she sat in her quiet home reflecting on her journey, Emily felt a familiar warmth envelop her. Closing her eyes, she was transported back to that place of radiant light where her journey had begun. She saw Jesus once more, his eyes filled with the same infinite love and wisdom. "You've done well, Emily," he said, his voice as comforting as she remembered. "You've shared the light, and you've touched hearts. But remember, the work is never truly finished. The seeds you've planted will continue to grow, and the light will spread." Tears filled Emily's eyes as she felt a profound sense of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." When she opened her eyes, she was back in her home, the warmth lingering like a gentle embrace. She knew that her journey, though nearing its conclusion, had left a legacy that would endure. In her final days, Emily wrote letters to those she had mentored, offering words of encouragement and wisdom. She entrusted her foundation to a team of dedicated individuals who shared her vision and passion. And she left behind a message for the world. Live with purpose, love without fear. Remember that every moment is an opportunity to create light in the darkness. And never forget that you are deeply, infinitely loved. Emily passed peacefully, her life a reflection of the love and hope she had carried from her near-death experience. And as her story continued to inspire others, her message of light and resilience became a guiding star for generations to come.